Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our bonus speaker here for the Bethlehem Historical Association on a Monday evening instead of a Wednesday. We're so glad you came. I'm Susan Leith, the president of our organization. If you were here last week, you've probably heard these announcements, but I'm going to announce them again, just in case. We have our very exciting afternoon tea coming up on April 26th. Thank you. We have a visit with Eleanor Roosevelt, and that's a fundraising tea, so be sure to check out information about that. If you're a member of BHA, we're having our annual meeting in May, which will feature a dinner at the Normanside Country Club, and it is our 60th anniversary. So Bethlehem Historical has been around for 60 years, so I hope you come and celebrate us with that. We have one more talk in our spring series, which is the history of bicycles, and that comes up April 16th. So there's a lot of things coming up in April to do with the Bethlehem Historical. And I always have to remind you that our museum is open on Sunday afternoons from 2 to 4 p.m. It's the Cedar Hill Schoolhouse. We like to say it's local history at its finest. You'll find all kinds of exciting displays about Bethlehem history. We hope you come on down. It's about, 10 minutes from here, so please do come visit. I do also have to say thank you so much to the Bethlehem Public Library for partnering with us to present these talks. They've also asked me to make sure I point out the exits in case we have an emergency. There's a fire exit over there and a fire exit over there. And that's all my quick little announcements for you this evening. It's really my pleasure to introduce Jeff Perlee, who is you're the chair of the Albany County 250th Commission. We just had a great conversation about patriots and loyalists and the very local connections that we can make to this larger arc of American Revolutionary history coming up on the 250th. So I will turn it over to you. Take it away.
Turn my mic on. My voice kind of, there we go, thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you here tonight. I had a beautiful ride. I live up on the hill above Altamont, and actually I've always, whenever I was coming here, I always go through Voorheesville and around, but the directions actually took me out to New Salem, and I came all the way down New Scotland Avenue, and it was, even though it's not quite spring, it still was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful night. So it's really great to be with you here this evening. It was touched on that we're going to be touching on some sort of macro themes, some big issues and regional and statewide. But I believe that for anyone who loves history, and I assume you all love history or you wouldn't be here, history starts very, very local. It certainly sparks that way when you're young. Sometimes it starts actually in an attic, which is the explanation for this picture. I grew up in Guilderland in a house that was built by my grandparents 100 years ago. And when I was in high school, I was up poking around the attic, as history nerds are wont to do. And there was over in the corner under one of the eaves, it was a Dutch colonial house, but under one of the eaves there was a couple of single mattresses stacked up, and I just pulled one of the mattresses off, and there were 4 or 5 of these big, this thing is this big. You know how the Victorians kind of overdid it. Family portraits that actually my grandmother didn't even remember. So they had been up there for quite a long time, and this was the biggest one. It's in a little bit of rough shape, but and why I brought it here tonight, this is my great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Henry Cady, C-A-D-Y, and his wife was Mary Furbeck Cady. And they lived most of their life in the border of Rotterdam and Guilderland and that area. But why they're relevant to tonight's discussion is Henry Cady's great-grandfather was this fellow, Colonel Asa Waterman. He was the colonel of the 15th Albany County Militia, which was the militia unit that was raised down around modern-day Chatham. That area was then called the King's District at the time. He was colonel was the head of that regiment. Oh, I'm sorry, the 17th. The 15th was the Schoharie Regiment. He saw service at Cherry Valley. He was stationed in the fort at Cherry Valley after the massacre. Was also in the Battle of Oriskany. And then this particular unit, they were sent out to Oriskany, which is where Rome, New York is now, and then hustled on back to get back to Saratoga in time to meet Burgoyne. And elements of the 17 different regiments of the Albany County Militia were actually drafted to form a regular unit, 2 regular units that were then interspersed into the Continental Line at Saratoga under General Glover from Massachusetts. His unit was one of them, and he was the commander of that particular unit at this second battle of Saratoga, the defining battle. He participated specifically in what was known as the attack on Bremen's redoubt. A redoubt is like a little fortified area with artillery. Bremen was one of the Hessians. You see the Americans chasing the Hessians over here. That was October 7th. That was the second battle of Saratoga. That's the one in which General Benedict Arnold once again defied instructions and went into the battle on horseback, was shot in the leg, fell over, the horse fell on him. He was rather seriously wounded. Colonel Waterman was one of the group of officers who lifted General Arnold off the battle, and afterwards, after everything that happened with Arnold, Waterman was reported to have said if he had known what was going on, he would have left him lying there in the field. Later on, Asa Waterman settled up in Burnt Hills, and his home is still there. There's a historical marker. It's a historic site right on Route 50 in Burnt Hills. We talked about patriots and Tories. This is the great-grandfather of his wife, the woman that was in the picture. This is John Furbeck. He was also in the Battle of Saratoga, except he was on the other side. He was a Hessian. He was born in Germany. At the age of 16, was impressed into service, which means he didn't want to go, right? But his prince had a contract with King George, and they were forced to go. He also fought at Saratoga along with 3,000 other Hessians. He was captured at the Battle of Saratoga, was sent to Hartford, which was the great depot for prisoners of war at the time. And up to that point, they had regularly done exchanges. We'll give you an officer for what have you. But apparently there were so many captured at Saratoga that there weren't enough to exchange. So he was never exchanged. He was instead sort of paroled out into the Connecticut Valley to work on the tobacco farms for the American farmers. And after a year of that, he then decided he was going to pick the winning team. He wound up joining the Continental Army after serving in the British Army. He served as a teamster, driving wagons for the supply wagons for the Army, and was stationed in Morristown and participated in various campaigns in the lower Hudson Valley. In the lower, actually in northern New Jersey, he was captured by Native Americans, was held prisoner for about a week and a half, and managed to escape. After he escaped, he decided he was going to stick around. He got married in Columbia County to another German speaker, one of the Palatines that were down in Germantown, and settled in what was then the town of Bethlehem in 1794. Now, I played a little fast and loose with it because it's currently now the town of Sutton, New Scotland, but it was Bethlehem at the time. So all his paperwork, all the census, all his pension applications, what have you, all listed him as a resident of Bethlehem. His children moved on to Guilderland. John Furbeck is buried right at the Presbyterian Church in New Salem, or New Scotland. Right on. I passed his grave on the way here tonight. The pension application, and if you like to dive into really neat online stuff, avail yourselves of the pension applications that are available on Ancestry.com. Because if you can read they're not transcribed, but you have to read the original writing. But if you can make it through, it's really interesting stuff. He was described by the lawyer who filed the pension for him as a highly reputable and wealthy farmer of easy circumstances, which is pretty remarkable given how he started out. I think it's really a testament to hard work and the really good soil in that part of New Scotland. But in his particular affidavit, he said he would not exchange our government for any in the known world. My days of enjoyment in this land of liberty are closing fast. I leave behind 4 sons who inherit my Republican principles. So what started as something he didn't want to do and was impressed into service, he wound up serving and raising a very, very large family. His son, Reverend Philip Furbeck, was the grandfather of the woman there, and then actually there were 3 or 4 lines of Dutch Reformed ministers. Incidentally, the minister who performed the wedding service for my grandmother, who didn't remember the picture, was actually the 3rd cousin of my grandmother's grandmother. So just small Albany, right? So anyway, the point is, this is one story of literally thousands of stories in our area, right? Of patriots and Tories in the same family, local people brushing up against, national and international historic figures, local people who were called upon in a time of great trial and turmoil, and answered the call, and of course changed the course of history. And all of that were people who lived right here and created our communities as we know them. That's sort of the mission of what we're attempting to do with the AmRev 250 Commission. This commission was created by county law 2 years ago. I also serve as an Albany County legislator, and I introduced the bill to create the commission. Happily, also the bill also contained a provision that Albany County would actually finally have a paid historian. As you may know, New York state law requires every municipality to have a historian. It does not require every county to, which is interesting. But notwithstanding that, about 59 of the 62 counties had county historians. Albany, in spite of our rich, amazing, glorious history, didn't have a county historian, but now we do. And happily, former Assemblyman John McEnany agreed to serve, and he is now our county historian. He's also one of the commissioners. The commissioners were all appointed, as is often the case, by sort of political leadership, but I really have to commend all the political leaders, President Company excluded, that they really picked very, very well. We have I think just a standout group. Sandy Zarillo is from Slingerland. She lives in the town of Bethlehem. She heads the DAR, the Peter Gansfort chapter of the DAR up at Van Skyke Mansion in Cohoes. We have one of our commissioners, Mark Jones, who is County Executive McCoy's appointee to the commissioner. He's here this evening. He'll have a few words. Professor Jennifer Dorsey heads the McCormick Center for the Study of the American Revolution at Siena College. Paul Stewart is from the city of Albany. He actually is one of the co-founders of the Stephen and Harriet Myers Underground Railroad Center. So it's a diverse group. It's a esteemed group, and most importantly, it's a group that's really sort of set out to work and hit the ground running. So we're approaching, next year will be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. This year begins the 250th anniversary of the war, of the American Revolution. These are big deals, and they are big deals every 50 years or so. Now, it's not quite as big as the bicentennial. The 51 is not quite as big as the one with the double zeros on it, but still it's a big deal. The first one was in 1826. The country was very scattered about that time. We didn't really have a national, we had a national government, but we didn't do things really at a national scale at that point. Both logistics and communications and the nature of the government was such that wasn't really the nature of the thing at the time. But it is memorable for on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson passed away that very day, which is amazing when you think about it, right? Was it Adams who said his last words were "Jefferson lives," or was it the other way around? Okay, yeah, which just boggles the mind that it happened that way. By 1876, with communications and railroads and consolidation, and a very powerful national government at that point, they put on a really big show. Centered in Philadelphia, the 1876 centennial, 10 million people attended. The population of the United States at the time was 40 million. So the equivalent of 1 in every 4 Americans. That includes all the Americans that lived in Iowa, Minnesota, Texas, Oregon, California, right? So it was a big big deal. It was really the equivalent also of sort of a World's Fair. It was America's chance to show the world that we had arrived and all the technological wonders that had transpired here. The 1926 sesquicentennial was also held in Philadelphia. That wasn't quite so successful. It was marred by some financial irregularities. The weather was horrible. They built on a site in South Philadelphia that was essentially swampland, so it was sort of jinxed from the beginning. But notwithstanding the actual, the lack of success of the actual party, the national celebration was still very significant. It really has been attributed as the beginning of the colonial revival movement in American architecture, in American furniture. Those of you may be familiar with Wallace Nutting. He was of this era. It became a thing, really for the first time, that Americans would look to our past, not some Greek past or not some British past, but our past, and embrace that when we decorated our homes, when we decided how we wanted to live. So even though the party itself wasn't such a success, it nevertheless, the observance itself had wide and deep impact. By 1976, and I think we probably all remember the bicentennial, that was also a big deal. At that time, remember, we had 3 networks. Right? We had 3 people who gave us the news. Everybody kind of operated off of the same kind of template, right? So if the guys at CBS, NBC, and ABC decided this was going to be a big deal, guess what? It was a big deal for us. With the Bicentennial Minute and all the cartoons were bicentennial, everything was themed bicentennial. And it was, coming as it did right in the wake of Vietnam and Watergate. I think the country was kind of wanting something to celebrate, and celebrate we did. And one of the really great things that came out of this, and I'm impressed that actually Bethlehem, as usual, is ahead of the curve. Your historical society was started 10 years before that, but many historical societies across the nation, and even in this area, I can point to Knox, the Guilderland Historical Society, all began at the beginning of the bicentennial era, when consciousness was starting to be raised as to, okay, how are we going to observe this? So that's a very significant legacy from that year. And as I said, the mass media and television really kind of gave the sense that we were all celebrating this together, right? The big takeaway, of course, was the thing that made the cover of Time magazine for the bicentennial, which back then, being on the cover of Time magazine really mattered, was the tall ships in New York. Remember the tall ships coming into New York Harbor. But the thing about the 1976 bicentennial is once July 5th, 1976 came and went, it was all done. Right? Think back, I mean, if you have a historical, think back to 1977, 1978. People weren't thinking history, weren't thinking the American Revolution, right? So it was very much centered on that day, that year, and then it was kind of over with. Also, all of the ones before this had a common theme of they were very Philadelphia and Boston centered. Right, which again, Philadelphia took the lead. They had the communications and the railway system, so it could justify it. But by 1976, it was made for television, right? So those places really sort of grabbed the spotlight. Now, I would argue grabbed the spotlight at the expense of a lot of other places that were overlooked because of an extreme emphasis on Philadelphia, Boston, New York. But that's the way it was. And why, and we often say Harvard wrote the history, right? So we tend to know what happened at Lexington and Concord. We tend to know Bunker Hill more than we know Saratoga or West Point, right? So, shame on us in New York that we have not, sort of been, intellectually muscular but that's just, New Yorkers have always been more focused on today and the future. New England is still very much, embracing their past. So that sort of explains why those previous celebrations were so New England and Philadelphia centric. So here we are today. Fast forward to 2025. This celebration nationally is going to be very different because we live in a very different country, right? We live in a very fragmented age. Gone are those 3 networks. Gone are those we all are doing the same thing, thinking the same things. Gone are those we all get our information from 3 sources, right? We get our information from as many, sites as there are on the World Wide Web, right? People are doing their own thing on their own time in their own little worlds, and as a society, for better or ill, we're very fragmented. We're very decentralized as a people, right? As a result, whether we want it or not, this is going to be a very decentralized celebration. There is a national effort, but it's fairly modest, right? The energy, the activity is much more at the regional and local level this time compared to the last celebrations, right? I think that's a good thing. It's certainly a good thing for us, right? Because we won't be overshadowed anymore by those big celebrations. Now they're still going to have big deals, and we will take note of what's going on in those places, but it's really an opportunity for us to step up and finally tell our story to ourselves and to our own kids so that they get it, but also try to tell a story to the rest of the country and get them to finally understand and appreciate just how significant this area was to securing our independence as a nation. A couple of the strategies, so bearing all that in mind as sort of background, a couple of the strategies that the Commission has sort of aligned on are, one, piggyback and collaborate, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't make everything about just what happened here, right? But embrace and take advantage of the fact that Albany is a central location, right? Albany is a center to a lot of other activity that happened in our orbit, so to speak, right? And that's a good thing. That's something to build on. So, as it was in 1777, Albany was the destination. That's where Burgoyne was trying to get to, right? That's where St. Leger was getting to from the Mohawk Valley. That's where Clinton and Howe were supposed to get to by coming up the Hudson. Destination Albany. The theory then was if they could get to Albany, they would sever New England from the rest of the country. It would end the Revolution. They were banking on that as their strategy. And they were probably correct. Had they gotten to Albany, it probably would have ended, right? So Destination Albany is sort of a double entendre. It's a historical reality. It's also an opportunity for us here to make Albany sort of the hub of activity that will be occurring, all around us, right? So there will be a lot going on over the next 3 or 4 years out in Utica, Rome, around Oriskany. There'll be a lot going on, certainly in Saratoga. Saratoga County has budgeted 5 times what Albany County has budgeted for their celebration. There'll be a lot, and there is a lot going on in the lower Hudson Valley, the Battle of White Plains, West Point, what have you, right? But the thing is, we sit smack dab in the center of all that. So we're already sort of asserting our prerogative, our role as sort of the central agent to that. In addition to that, we're doing everything we can at the Commission level to encourage local town observances and activities as well. We are doing these talks at as many of the historical. We've been to New Scotland, Guilderland, Bethlehem. We're coming up soon in Colony and Queens. City of Albany will be doing. So with the historical societies, we've also met with the town supervisors to urge them to do what they can to kickstart sort of observances. Happily, like in Guilderland, they have a full commission. They have a very, very ambitious slate of activities to pursue. The other thing I should have mentioned earlier is trying to correct what I would say was the mistake of 1976. This is not just a one-year observance. This commission has a life by legislation till 2033. This is an observance of the full length and breadth of the Revolutionary War, right? So an event that happened in 1779 will be as commemorated, as important as one that happened in 1776. Again, that's important for us because most of the activities in which we were highly relevant to the outcome occurred later in the war, right? right? We have really sort of three phases. One which Commissioner Jones will talk about, which actually preceded the war. The second, of course, was the summer of 1777, and the third was later in the war when it really sort of took on the character of a civil war, and that involved much of western Albany County. A couple of the other things that we've established as priorities is education, because we don't know our own story, right? We've been meeting with the Albany County Department of Parks and Recreation, which County Executive McCoy has done a great job of sort of reinvigorating that department. They now have a commissioner. In fact, there's a measure to vote to actually make it a full department. They run camps. I didn't know about it before I was a legislator. I didn't know that the county had a recreation department. They do it they do it like at the Bethlehem Park, Elm Avenue Park, and they do it in New Scotland, whatever. But they're run and they're organized by the county, and they're free. And kids, and heretofore they've been almost exclusively traditional recreational, basketball camps, lacrosse camps, what have you. We're going to start adding history camps, archaeology camps, right? Because not every kid wants to go to basketball camp, right? So we're working to develop a curriculum for a series of history camps, to get them young. Because if you get them young, and the hook sets, like us, they'll be in this stuff for life, and that's great. We've also approved a grant program, even though our funding is modest. We want to distribute it as widely as possible. So we'll be issuing grants up to $5,000 each to local historical societies, local authors who can partner with a not-for-profit, basically to tell the story of what happened in Albany County. The only real criteria is, again, partnership with a local not-for-profit and result in some work that collectively can be put into some compendium, so we have something to show for the effort. We're not so much focused on sort of live events and things like that, but something that we can leave some memorial behind us. We're very focused on this legacy. We want to make sure that there's something that we leave behind, right? Remember the Tricentennial in Albany back in 1988? It was a fun summer. They had a great parade. They had an awesome gala, but it was all about kind of parties. And the parties were nice, but, like parties, they end, and then, you have some nice pictures, but there really wasn't a lot left after to remind someone who came here in 1990 of, all the work and all the significance of that event. So we want to make sure we have some legacy that the commission leaves behind it when our work is done. And we're aligning on the legacy being focused on heritage tourism, because that aligns with the other sort of objective of the commission, not just to commemorate the past, but to proactively and exploit, in the best sense of the word, our rich past so as to serve us going forward in the future and develop economic activity around our history, right? Which is something they have done very successfully in a lot of places whose history is not as deep and not as rich as ours are, right? So it is low-hanging fruit for us. We've just never seen fit to pick at it, right? I mean, anyone who's been to Charleston, South Carolina can attest how powerful heritage tourism is, right? It transformed that place. Ironically, there's a couple that were responsible for that. Their name was Morowitz. Victor Morowitz and his wife. He was one of the heads of the Federal Reserve System. He was J.P. Morgan's personal banker and personal lawyer. He had a lot of money. They went to Charleston. They had a historical sort of consciousness, sensibility around 1920, and they were absolutely depressed by what they saw. These gorgeous, townhouse, they were crumbling, falling down, literally around everyone's ears. They said, this can't be. They single-handedly jump-started the historical revival movement in Charleston, South. They are beloved in Charleston, South Carolina, right? Guess where their summer house was? On the banks of the Normanskill in Albany County, which is now the site of a housing development near the Farnsworth Middle School in Guilderland, right? So it just goes to show, we have never really put our shoulder to the wheel when it comes to, making use of our history. So we want to really dive into this area of heritage tourism, and again, we have the content. Specifically, we're aligning around this notion of a revolutionary trail, and trail in a sort of multimodal sense. If any of you listened to for a while for NPR, I don't think they still do it, but they used to advertise quite extensively Mr. Jefferson's Virginia. It was an initiative of the Virginia Department of Tourism, which was a curated experiential sort of holiday that the state organized and then marketed nationwide for people to come, spend their money in Virginia, learn the history of Virginia, and have an awesome experience. And it was wildly successful, right? Made a lot of money for a lot of people in the state of Virginia, and educated a lot of people as well. That's our template, is that Mr. Jefferson's Virginia program. So to create our trail, what we're looking at is starting with the existing concentration of sites in downtown Albany, right? Cherry Hill, Schuyler Mansion, Tenbrook Mansion, Fort Craylow. I mean, there's an abundance. They're sort of disparate now. They're not linked together, right? You kind of have to find them, and right. So, but to make that sort of the focus, and then ultimately make it our business to move out, literally over the time period of the war, and physically move to the west, so that we wind up linking up with Schoharie County, which was the focus of so much of the activity in the war in 1779, 1780, 81. That will bring us out through to, hopefully, the site of the Battle of the Normanskill, which was the only battle in Albany County during the war. It was in 1777. It was mild. It was only 2 or 3 people killed, but it was hugely significant. And here's why. Burgoyne was depending, absolutely counting on the intelligence that he had, that once they came down with 8,000 soldiers, which today is the equivalent of an invasion from Canada of 750,000 soldiers, right? Based on current population. So this huge invasion would then rally the latent loyalists who were here in abundance, right? And then they would provide both the sort of protect his flanks, provide the food and the sustenance that this huge army required, because they couldn't haul it all down through the wilderness from Canada, right? So that was an absolute predicate of the whole strategy to get to Albany, was the rising up of these loyalists. In order to effectuate that, he sent out scores of spies ahead of the invasion, right? I just read in a pension application about a spy that was operating over in Guilderland Center, you know, in the weeks ahead of the invasion, right? And rallying the loyalists, meet at Torrey Cave in the Helderbergs, meet in the Beaver Dam in Berne, right? Here's the dates, here's the times, whatever, and on the signal, they were all to rise up and cause as much trouble, sort of modern-day domestic terrorism, as they possibly could, so as to force beleaguered General Schuyler to take these forces that were now converging on Albany to go meet Burgoyne and dispense them, right, and spread them around to meet. Schoharie was in an uproar, right? The western flank was in the uproar. Chatham was in an uproar, right? They all were like, we need help, we need Continental troops, we need Continental, and if they didn't get the Continental troops, then the local people would be dispirited and tend to say, well, I guess the British are going to win, so I guess we will side with the British, right? Why the Battle of the Normanskill was so important. A, it occurred the same day as the first deployment of armed cavalry ever used by the United States Army went through Guilderland and Altamont on their way to Schoharie, and fought in a battle, the first time they ever fought. But that very same day, it's reported, I think it's a little high, but it's reported that 300 loyalists had gathered in the valley of the Normanskill, right there by modern-day Towasentha Park in Guilderland, with the objective to march on Schenectady and set it on fire. Right? And that would force Schuyler to send more troops out there and deal with that threat that couldn't go on to meet Burgoyne, right? The Patriots got wind of it. They sent a detachment of militia from Schenectady and New England troops that happened to be stationed there on their way to Oriskany to break up the gathering successfully. They captured a bunch of guys hiding in the hay under the barn, and killed 2 brothers. And that was the first good news that the Patriots had received in a summer that was unrelenting with negativity and anxiety, fear and doom, right? The very next day, success in Schoharie. A week later, success at Oriskany. So finally, this sort of inevitability of the British invasion wasn't quite so inevitable. And what happened? The locals turned on a dime, right? And that, combined with Burgoyne using Native Americans and deploying them in atrocious ways against loyalists and patriots, which just sort of inflamed the frontier, compelled the Americans, who were previously kind of, you have to admit, sitting on their hands, right? Kind of waiting to see which way the wind were going to blow. They all showed up at Saratoga. By the time Burgoyne got to Stillwater, the American force was 3 times as large, 4 times as large as the British force. And he couldn't go anywhere. They had completely enveloped him in this massive, and it started because of the string of good, successful news that started in the Battle of Normanskill. So though small, it still was very, very important in the chain of events that ultimately led to the success. But what's there now? A blue and yellow New York State historic marker. That's it. The irony is the site is completely surrounded by public parkland, right? But there's just a blue and yellow historic marker. We've met with Supervisor Barber. I'm pretty confident that the town is going to take the initiative to make it so that there is a stop there that is worthy of someone who would, what we talk about it sort of anecdotally. We say our target is someone who lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, and is a history buff. And last year they went to Virginia. They might go to Lookout Mountain, but this is how they plan their vacations, right? This is how they spend their money. They take their kids, they take their parents, whatever, right? We want to give them something so that they would actually think to come here. But that's a high bar, right? We have to give them the content so that when they come here, they say, yeah, that was really cool, or that was interesting, or that was worth it, right? So we have the content, in fact, but we have to, connect the content and make these things so that they're actually worthy of a tourist coming here to spend money. There's some effort with the state at Thatcher Park to get them to reopen Torrey Cave, which was another important Tory site. I met recently with the supervisor up in Knox, and there's some interest in perhaps doing something to finally cast a spotlight on the role that the native Mohican people played in the Revolution, and certainly their significance before the Revolution. And then, of course, leading out to the other sort of concentration of sites in the Schoharie Valley, the Stone Fort, which is, that's all there as well. And the site I forgot, the deadliest site in Albany County was the Dietz family massacre out in the Switskill Valley in the town of Berne. And just totally by happenstance, the County of Albany just recently purchased Switskill Park, which is immediately adjacent to the massacre site. You would have thought I had something to do with that. I didn't. It was just totally coincidental. But so we see these sort of strings of places that have this historical significance, and we're trying to make it our work to curate and to bring out the stories to make it worthy of these tourists. Also, at the same time, working with the Discover Albany folks so that when people are coming to go to the events in Saratoga, to go to Oriskany, to go to West Point, where do they fly into? They fly into Albany County, right? So rather than just get a rental car and go, give them something that can actually keep them here for a little bit, and give them a worthy experience, and have them spend some dollars here. Very quickly, I'll just go through the timeline. We're already organized, so check. This year, we'd like to get the history camp started this year. We still have the chance that we can do that. But Ken Burns, everyone knows Ken Burns. He's doing one of his 95-part documentaries on the American Revolution. Amazing it's taken him this long to get to it, but he has gotten to it. It's going to debut on PBS in November. He is coming to Albany to give a preview of the show. We'll be his host, and he's giving a preview and talk at the Palace Theater in September. So that will be our first and sort of kickoff. We're also working with the production people at WMHT. They like to do these corollary sort of local versions of the big national show, and we're working with them on content that, again, the fear is if we didn't involve ourselves, it would be all about Saratoga, right? We want them to tell the stories of how important Albany County was, in the whole thing. The other aspect that is so overlooked is Albany County was, Western Albany County and Eastern Schoharie County, it was referred to as the breadbasket of the Revolution, right? It's hard to picture now, but this was such a productive agricultural region. It was the wheat growing capital of the colonies, right? We fed George Washington's army wherever he was. If he was in Trenton, if he was in Morristown, if he was in Westchester County, his foodstuffs came largely from up here. Right? So we provided the sustenance, and it's interesting, even in modern days, no one ever, the quartermaster general doesn't get much attention, but unless you can feed and clothe an army, you don't have an army. Imagine what it was like in 1775, right? So those provisions were so vitally important. And I love the story, right outside my village in Altamont, there's the big white Center Hall Colonial. It's the Crounce farmhouse. It still sits right under the escarpment. That was a family that they were patriots. They were surrounded. Across the street was the Van Aaron Barn, 1776. It was sort of a concentration of very staunch patriot families. But the Crounce family, and the record is that they kept, in the summer of 1777, they kept just enough for them to make it through the winter. Right? Everything else they had, they put on wagons and sent up to Saratoga to feed the army. The patroon's agent, the patroon was young at that time, his agent was Colonel Tenbroke, who was his uncle, right? He was in charge of the militia in Albany County. He was so grateful to the Crounce family for the sacrifice that they made, he actually enabled them to buy the land of their farm, which they were, at the time, they were the only people in Albany County that actually owned the land, right? Everybody else was tenants. You couldn't own the land, right? The Crounces have owned their land since 1778 because of the gratitude of the patroon for them making that sacrifice to feed. And that's, again, that's just one story of a multitude of really important role that the Albany County farmers played. And I'm sure Bethlehem was actually, if anything, probably more abundant than the Helderberg region. So, and it had the access to the river. So I can't speak with any authority, but my guess is Bethlehem was of huge importance to feeding and provisioning the Continental troops. Later in this year, you may be familiar with General Knox. He was the Boston bookseller who was in charge of the artillery for the Army. General Washington sent him to Ticonderoga after Ethan Allen captured it and said, we need those cannon because the British were dug in Boston. So Knox got the cannons from Ticonderoga to Boston in the middle of the winter. And when the British woke up one day and saw those cannon on Dorchester Heights, out they went and never came back to Boston. But the logistical feat of getting those cannons down from Ticonderoga when there were no roads, right, on sleighs, pulled by horses and pulled by ox, then across the river, across the Berkshires, it was monumental. They're reenacting that Knox Trail. Of course, it came down through Albany County, came right down Route 9, through Loudonville, Latham, stopped where the Quackenbush Tavern is, and then he spent a couple of days at the Schuyler Mansion. So December, and that was in December 1775, so December is our time to play a role in the Knox reenactment, and we'll have a couple of events at the Schuyler Mansion in December. Assemblyman McEnany is our sort of point person for that particular one. Next year, we mentioned the tall ships, that they're bringing the tall ships back to New York Harbor on July 4th, 2026. On July 5th, 2026, as many of the tall ships that can fit under the Hudson River bridges will sail up to Albany. And we'll be their host, provided we can raise the money, because it's not cheap to get a bunch of really big, tall ships to come to Albany. But that is a huge undertaking, but it's pretty exciting, and the county executive's office is being very helpful to us in that effort. And then, of course, you move to the end of the year, that's when Ticonderoga becomes relevant. The role of Philip Schuyler, he's our patriot. so overlooked. Again, Harvard wrote the history. General Gates overshadowed him. He got all the glory, but we won because of Philip Schuyler. I won't get into the modern day kerfuffle about, the disgrace of what we've done to Philip Schuyler, but we'll leave it at that. But I guarantee you, Philip Schuyler at the end of this will have a full appreciation, warts and all, and there were warts, there are no doubt. But we'll have a much more in-depth understanding of Philip Schuyler than we've been led to have over these last few years. Moving into 2027 is probably the big year locally. Again, it's Destination Albany with all the activities around the Battle of Saratoga. The Battle of the Normanskill, again, the town is hopeful to have something there by that time that is worthy of visitors, some sort of reenactment of the battle. One of the two loyalists that were killed was my 6th great-grandfather's, and I will not be reenacting the role of the loyalist. but that'll be a fun time. And then moving 2028 and on, then we put the focus on the home front, right? We talked about the breadbasket of the Revolution, Tories and robbers amongst us. It got really, really nasty, right? The big battles were largely over in this area, but the day-to-day strife was very real and very, very uncomfortable for people on both sides, right? Nobody could live in peace, right? Because there was no law. It was literally robbers and Tories and bad guys. I mean, it was every day you were at risk. Again, we talked about Albany and the Mohicans and the special relationship. The Mohicans, not only was this Mohican land, right? And that's sort of a personal pet peeve of mine. We never sort of give our natives their due. And when we do, we tend to be so Iroquois-centric in New York State, right? My kids go to Farnsworth Middle School where there's 4 houses and they're named after, I love the fact that they're named after native tribes or native things. There's Tawasenta, there's Mohawk, there's Hiawatha, all good, all appropriate. And then there's Seneca House, which I don't get because the Senecas live 350 miles away and the school sits on Mohican land, and the Mohicans can't even get a house named for them, right? They truly are. I mean, James Fenimore Cooper they truly were the sort of the hard luck, because by our standard, by white European standards, they did everything right? They greeted us when we came. We never went to war with them. They sided with us in the Revolution, and still they got, pardon my French, they still got screwed. So we're going to do what we can to make sure that people around here have a better understanding and appreciation for the Mohican. And they're still a very active tribe. They're out in Wisconsin. Fortunately, they got a casino, so they're also a pretty wealthy tribe. So they can afford to do some programming, and hopefully we'll do some joint programming with them. Going into 2029 is the 275th anniversary of a very important event that was centered here, which is the Albany Plan of Union. And that's actually Commissioner Jones's initiative, so I'll just let him say a few words about what we're looking at there.
So many of you, everybody can hear me on a microphone, right? So everybody, or many of you here are probably familiar with the Albany Plan of Union, but those that are not, in late spring, early summer, 1754, the Albany delegation convened in the city of Albany, which involved I think 7 of the colonies sent delegations. It was in response to the French and Indian War at the time. And part of the delegation was Benjamin Franklin. He was here, though, kind of with his own agenda. And his agenda was to, at the time, he recognized that this was an opportunity for him to present for the first time in the history of our young, to be country at the time, to present to the delegations the idea of combining the colonies under one federal government. And this became known as the Albany Plan of Union. Now, unfortunately, it didn't succeed. At the time, by July 10th, he was able to convince the delegates that this was a good idea, and they all signed on, but not one colonial assembly at the time, when it went back to the individual governments, agreed to this. And the British government at the time did not agree to it either. Franklin, I think, famously said at the time that that it was a time, it was an idea whose time had not come yet. The colonies were not ready to give up their autonomy, and the British were not ready to give up control. And However, this was definitely the precursor to what would eventually become the Articles of Confederation and subsequently Constitution. This was also where the term, many historians and scholars, and some attribute it to Franklin, although it's kind of up in the air, where Albany became known as the cradle of the Union. This is where it all started. This is where it all began. And here's the really good news, and this is what I want to talk to you guys a little bit about tonight. The commission began to talk a little bit about this, and we did a little research, and we discovered that the document, the original document, is housed in the British Archives in London. So we began to kind of toss it around a little bit, and we said, how cool would it be to get the document back in Albany for a viewing? Now here's the really good news. As of last Thursday, the New York State Museum, the New York State Archivist, and the New York State Historian have agreed to partner with us, and we are now beginning our due diligence and looking at the efficacy of procuring the document to coincide with the 275th anniversary of its origin for a public viewing at the New York State Museum. Now, this is a pretty heavy lift, particularly when you're dealing with another country. With our partnership with the New York State Museum, it got easier. We still have a lot of things we've got to go through to get to that point, but we're very excited for the fact that the interesting thing is, if this is true and we're not sure about this, we're still doing a little bit of research. This document has never been viewed publicly. Because it didn't succeed at the time, the original has never been viewed publicly in Albany or New York, but even back when they were trying to get this approved, they don't think that any of the documents were actually viewed publicly. So this may be the first time this document has ever been out in public to be viewed. So that's a really exciting thing that we're going to be working on. We're going to try to keep the various historical societies, in the loop in terms of how we're moving along. But we're hoping that come 2029, we have a public viewing of the Albany plan, which would be really exciting.
Great, thank you. How galling it must have been to the Harvard historians to know that it all started in Albany. Because it was sent to the colonial office for their okay, right? Because in order for the thing to be effective, although to Mark's made the point, it wasn't approved by the colonial assemblies either, but ultimately it would not have been approved unless the government in London said okay. So the original was sent to them saying this is what we'd like to do.
There are, on our fallback, there are 7 or 8 original copies, one of which is in New York City. There's one in Rhode Island, Virginia, Connecticut. We don't want to have to use an original copy, but it's better than nothing if England tells us to, sorry, no. But we're hoping that that won't be the case.
If you've ever seen the famous cartoon of the snake in pieces with join or die, that was from the Albany Plan of Union. And also the Union, or the Congress conclave was held in, and I don't really know the pronunciation, I don't speak Dutch, but it was the Stadthaus, S-T-A-D-T, which was the Stadthaus, which was the City Hall in Albany, which, in true Albany fashion, we tore down. So we don't have Independence Hall, we don't have Faneuil Hall, we tore it down.
That would have been right at the bottom of Broadway or State Street and Broadway, where the D&H building is now.
A little further down, I think, more like Hudson Avenue. But it's interesting that that area of Albany is now the focus of a lot of redevelopment. I saw a plan, they want to do a soccer stadium that looks like it could be in Dallas. But I don't know why they don't do a recreation of the place where this Albany Plan of Union was held, right? They did it in Williamsburg. Those were all recreated, and people don't know the difference. But so we'll be planting that seed as well over the next couple of years. Thank you, Mark. Moving towards sort of the victory lap of the commission at the tail end, 2032 and thereabouts. We talked about the frontier wars and the Dietz massacre, but 250 years of Dutch-American friendship. That's something that's particularly relevant to Albany, right? The Netherlands was the first nation to recognize the United States. The Netherlands was next to France the most important financer of American independence. We sent Thomas Jefferson to Paris, right? We sent John Adams to Amsterdam. So to signify the importance of the Netherlands in helping us secure our independence. Of course, Albany and the Netherlands have some still very active cultural and historical ties, right? Charles Gehring, who lives not far from here, has dedicated his life to making sure that those ties are understood and maintained. So we again, it's sort of at the tail end of our work, but we definitely want to do something so that when the modern day Netherlands says, okay, how are we going to help observe? They'll send a tall ship for sure, but in other ways that their government can help America commemorate this important, we'd like Albany to be the center of that, right? I remember when, was it Queen Beatrix came for I actually met her. I was, how old was I, 21? And she came to the Tricentennial Gala, and my sister's father-in-law works for the governor, so got us tickets. And you couldn't rent a tux in Albany. It was black tie. You couldn't rent a tux. And I was 21. I didn't have a tux. I still don't have a tux, but at 21, I sure didn't have a tux. But my next-door neighbor had a tux that he said he last wore to the Stork Club in Manhattan in 1952. So it gives you an idea what the tux looked like. I mean, I think the lapels were like out to here. It was about 4 sizes too big, and I distinctly remember when I went to meet the Queen, you have to curtsy, whatever, and you extend your hand, and the arm of the tux was, I had to quick go like that. She saw but she was lovely. She was lovely. But I don't know that we'll get the royal family back, but certainly, to the extent that the Netherlands will do something, and I'm sure they will, we'd like Albany to be very much a part of that commemoration. That's it for the presentation. Obviously, there's a lot there. We have a lot to do, but happily, we're off and running. The legislature, and I have to give a shout out to your legislator, Chairwoman Cunningham, who supported an effort that I introduced just last month to actually allocate some of our funding to a part-time staff person for the commission. Because any of you who have done committee work know that you really, going from committee meeting to committee meeting, when you have staff in the interim, you can really accomplish a lot more. So hopefully by this time next month, we'll have our staff. We have had staff on a borrowed basis, but actually his wife is having a baby next week, and so so we're very grateful to Legislator Cunningham for her support of that measure. So we can keep the momentum going. Any questions, comments, objections?
So you talked about how everything for this anniversary is very decentralized. And so I think one of the things I'm coming across, like finding an issue, is like knowing when things are going on. I'll hear about it through like word of mouth, or I'll hear about it and it's like, oh, it's next week, and I'm like, oh, I can't make that. So I was wondering, is there anything that's being done, if it's not on a state level, even just a regional level with the different counties, to try to promote it in almost like one place, like a one-stop shop, where I can be like, here's a calendar of events for the next year that I can put down, and I'm in the DAR, we're both in the same chapter, that we can share with our women and stuff like that.
And then also, because our chapter is honoring a Black Revolutionary War patriot, Albany businessman, and educator, and so how do we get that funneled? Can that get funneled through somewhere so more people know about that dedication?
Sure.
And I'm also working, believe it or not, with the Capital District Embroiderers Guild. And we have actually partnered with Gansford DAR chapter, and we are doing a America's Tapestry. We are stitching the New York State
I've heard about that.
portion of the tapestry. And although I had only seen pictures of it, it's going to be this magnificent, magnificent piece.
I've heard that.
So we're trying to actually, how can we ship that we're thinking about shipping that tapestry or, by car out to, different areas in the state, so the different embroidery, the local guilds there can also stitch on it.
Yeah.
So, and how do we share that information? That come to the Gansford chapter house, we're stitching on Sunday.
Yeah, our website, and I'm not a web guy, but our website is in the process of being sort of built out. We're working with the folks at Discover Albany, which is sort of the county convention and tourism bureau, and they'll be hosting that locally. But I think your question about sort of more on a comprehensive regional basis, I think that's something we'll probably grab as part of our effort to make Albany central to these activities, right? So until another region tells us, hey, no, that's ours, stop posting it, which I don't know why they would, because it's getting the word out, right? I envision that will be something we will try to do, is sort of be this sort of central repository. And to that end, at our last meeting, which was interesting at the Port of Albany, we hold our meetings we try to hold them at historic sites or relevant sites, and Port of Albany was to get an idea as to could they host the tall ships. But at our last meeting at the Port, we talked and agreed that we would be issuing invitations to all of the other regional commissions to come to Albany with us, with the Albany Committee as the host, to talk about these sort of regional efforts. So I think it's in our interest because of our location. Right? The State Tourism Council has done a pretty good job. They had a gathering in Saratoga in September. They're going to have another one, I think, in June. They do a pretty good job, but for amongst the professionals, but for the general public, there really isn't the type of resource that you're looking at. But hopefully in a couple months you'll look to our page as being that. Sadly, that opportunity for us to sort of grab that role exists because the state has frankly done a horrendous job, right? They didn't even have a commission until a few months ago, which I cannot understand. And it's not for the lack, Assemblywoman Werner, and there's been some people that are just like, hey, this is really, really important, but it just doesn't seem to be a priority with the current leaders. So, but again, that unfortunate thing is an opportunity for regional groups to play a bigger role than we otherwise would.
The tall ships for the bicentennial was absolutely phenomenal. And the town of Bethlehem's part was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was just shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
And it was a great event.
Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous.
And we envision this, it can't all be done at one location. We're looking at the Port of Queens, we're looking, so the Bethlehem Park is, all the way down.
All the way down.
Yeah. They'll stop, I think the plan is to stop at Kingston and stop at Albany, but, I'd actually rather see them go by than, see them stopped. But that's a big effort. We have a request in for state funding. But again, my concern is the state just doesn't seem to put a value on this, so.
You could ask for subscriptions from citizens.
We could, although things like that you don't want to ask unless you're pretty sure you're going to get it, because you don't want to look, you don't want to fall flat on your face. But I'm pretty confident that we'll get, once we have a staff person, one of the things the staff person is going to be tasked with is to reach out to the local business community as well, right? We've not done any of that, right? Mr. Laraway, who runs the Port of Queens, right, is a constituent of mine in Altamont, and this could be highly relevant to him, and he has the means to support it. But these are all sort of professional grade activities with professional grade, S, and frankly, we're not geared up for that yet, but hopefully we will be. Stewart's, by the way, Stewart's Shop is a huge supporter of Saratoga County efforts, which I'm going to make the argument to them. That's not mutually exclusive. They sell a lot of milk and ice cream in Albany County too, so we're hopeful, they'll see fit to sort of spread that around a little bit.
So how could the Bethlehem Historical Association, what would you ask us to do to support this effort?
I would lobby, and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, there is not a town commission, there's not a town 250 commission per se? Yeah, I would make that your first activity, is to lobby the town itself to establish, under the auspices of the town, a Bethlehem 250 commission, right? And if they need a template, have them call Supervisor Barber and Guilderland, because they're off and running. Because frankly, one of the other realities of our age is, people don't join Kiwanis anymore. The service clubs, even historical society, right? De Tocqueville would be very upset to see the withering of civic America.
We
right?
have 200 members.
Well,
so we're a very strong organization.
That's awesome. But that's highly unusual, right? So in commemorations in the past, a lot of it fell to service and civic organizations, right? The reality of our world today is local government has really filled those roles. And if local government doesn't do it, it probably or may not get done. But local government has to be made aware of the importance, of the opportunities, right? And that comes from sort of one-on-one lobbying. The nice thing about local government is they're responsive, right? So if the supervisor gets enough people saying, we really got to do this, right? And it would be a shame. I mean, I have somebody who's all ready to do a grant to do a feature just on Caesar, the African-American slave who lived here during the Revolution. So Bethlehem definitely has, right? You have the content, right? And I think, sorry, I won't go on and on, but it strikes me. You look out to like Western New York. Now, granted, they had the Sullivan Clinton expedition, so they were not untouched by the Revolution. But there are counties, Chautauqua County. There's counties, and even in Ohio, right? They were not central to these events, right? But they're still making a big deal about it, right? The irony is, it happened right here, right? And we almost let it go by. So. But like I said, we're making up for, I don't want to say lost time, but certainly it is definitely not too late for the town to get its act together. And the other thing I would really stress, personal prerogative, that again, focus on things that you can leave behind, right? Don't entertain people, right? Inform people, educate people, but focus on things that could be left behind, so that the work you do will survive the work you do. Whether it's a written work, whether it's something that has the opportunity of impacting someone, 40 years from now, right? I thank God for a guy named Art Gregg in Altamont who just saw fit to write all this stuff down, 70 years ago, because if he didn't, it would all have been lost. And he had a good contact in the state ed department, so Guilderland is basically covered in those blue and yellow signs, which are, not just the primary, they're almost the exclusive means by which today's citizens have any interaction with our history, right? But for the personal effort of one person, even that wouldn't have happened.
Sorry, I may have missed this. I came in a few minutes later. But is there a sense of budget that the county may offer for the commission? And kind of a related question, I think I can speak for a lot of people in the community at that level beyond. There's a lot of concern about budget being used for Philip Schuyler and his contribution, and would the commission be open to really prohibiting, for lack of a better word, any funding going towards Schuyler-related stuff, and any activities actually being held at Schuyler Mansion that are taxpayer funded? So this is coming from taxpayer money. It can't happen at Schuyler Mansion. Is there sort of crossed off the document what we're going to be doing?
No, I don't think that would ever happen because I don't think that's appropriate. I think the appropriate thing to do is to use this opportunity to educate and inform about the man and his legacy, right? To wipe him off the docket is, that's Stalinist history. We're not interested in that kind of commemoration. Certainly, putting just a statue of a person with a long and in many ways flawed historical record needed to be corrected, and it perhaps someday will be corrected with the statue back in place. I don't know. That's a City of Albany decision. But just removing it and putting it in an unknown warehouse someplace is reactive. And again, it may be dramatic to call it Stalinist, but that's what it is. I mean, when you erase things as if they never even occurred because they offend your current sensibility on one aspect of the person or his career, that's I think is misguided. In terms of our overall funding, this year we received an appropriation of $60,000. That sort of is a starting appropriation. Again, Saratoga County's is I think 300 or 350. So we're hopeful that will be increased, but we're cognizant that we have to show that we deserve the increase, and that comes from showing work and activity. Anything else? Great. Well, thank you all very much. Great to spend time with you.